Welcome to Raging Bullets, episode 398, Pop Culture and Whatnot with Freddie E. Williams II. Welcome to Raging Bullets. I'm Sean Whalen, drnorge, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Jim, the sensei of the Whatnot Segulin, and the Duke of You-Know. On this episode, we are joined by longtime friend of the show, Freddie E. Williams II, to talk in depth about his work on Dark Horse's Brain Boy, The Men from G.E.S.T.A.L.T, Issues 1 and 2. We are proud members of the Comics Podcast Network and the League of Comic Book Podcasts. We are also glad to say that we are part of the DCinfinite.com podcast partnership. Sponsoring us this episode is InStockTrades.com. Over at InStockTrades.com, we're talking about Brain Boy this episode, and it's all from Dark Horse. And if you want to check out the first run of Brain Boy, this collects issues 0 through 3, the trade paperback's available, Volume 1. It's $14.99 regularly, 42% off, only $8.69. It's a great way to grab that volume and get caught up on the Brain Boy story to start reading the issues we talk about on this episode. Also on this show, Dark Horse released the Brain Boy Archives, the classic gold key. That's $49.99 regularly, 42% off, only $28.99. So if you're enjoying our episode and you want to delve into from Brain Boy's world, this is a great way to get caught up on the whole shebang in 2 quick volumes from our sponsor, InStockTrades.com. Also to remind you that we're also sponsored by DCBService.com, your comic book pre-order source. Remember, they are a Comixology and My Digital Comics partner, and if you link those accounts to your DCB Service account, you get 5% of those purchases towards your DCB Service order. I want to thank both of those sites for continuing to sponsor our show. James, what kind of a podcast are we?
Pop Culture and Whatnot, a division of Raging Bullets, is a spoiler podcast. We go in-depth into plotline, story twists, and whatnot associated with the great artwork of Freddie E. Williams, as well as the fabulous story of Brain Boy. So, if you haven't read the books, you may want to come back later so you can better enjoy the show.
Let's talk some comics.
Nothing like the handy-dandy electro claw for carving through metal doors.
And joining us once again is longtime friend of the show, Freddie E. Williams II, and we're going to be talking about his work on Brain Boy, The Men from G.E.S.T.A.L.T, Issues 1 and 2, and it's a 4-issue miniseries from Dark Horse. And Freddie, welcome back to Raging Bullets.
Thanks for having me on the show. It's good to be back.
Welcome back to the Raging Bullets podcast. Welcome back.
That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Let's face it, that was beautiful, okay? Listen to no one who tells you anything different.
We're going to work on your definition of beautiful. Speaking of beauty, actually, the irony is I'm looking at the cover for Brain Boy 1. And speaking of beautiful, oh my, I'm a big fan of spy stories. I like some of the computer games like No One Lives Forever. I'm a big James Bond fan. Spy stuff in general, there's something glamorous and exciting about it. Gadgets and gizmos. And in the case of Brain Boy, you've got special powers and things being brought into that world. This looks very James Bond movie-ish. This, honestly, I was thinking the No One Lives Forever video game, which I don't know if either of you have played. It was a game series that came out years ago, and it was a first-person shooter, and it was all spy-oriented. But the reason why I go to that is, as I read Brain Boy, I'm thinking to myself, this would be a cool video game world. Especially with the way games are nowadays, with games like BioShock, where the lead character has powers. As I was reading through the story, I'm like, there's so many of the cool elements here that would lead into a great game narrative. The cover itself, though, is gorgeous. I know you, on your Facebook page, post a lot of your content as you're working on it, and you do that, I follow your Facebook and Twitter, and I love seeing your sketches, your convention sketches and things that you're doing in commission pieces, but I also enjoy, you'll throw up art pieces relating to projects you're currently working on, and I was salivating at the Brain Boy stuff as you were putting it up. I know you've got one as your banner up at the top, the second issue cover.
Yeah, it's part of the cropped-in version of the cover for issue 2, and thank you. The cover is penciled, in quotes, it's digital, but it's penciled by me And then it's colored by my good friend Dan Scott, who is a digital painter who he does work for Wizards of the Coast, for Magic the Gathering, and he also does work for, like, there was a Warhammer card game, and he does some work for D&D, and he does magazine covers and some comic covers and stuff like that. And he and I used to work at Hallmark together. We used to play Magic all the time together. And even though, and there was a real brief time he worked in the studio here with me, so we've just been friends for years at the point, and we were looking for something to collaborate on. And it came up that whenever I was doing the miniseries, Dark Horse had brought up to me, they basically asked me because they liked my covers, and I had done like the convention backdrop for them in 2013, and I had done some other, several other promotional things for them. But they had made a decision in our office that they wanted the covers to look more like oil paintings, I guess. Like they wanted not necessarily fine art, but something that didn't look like a piece of line art that was in colored. And I am not able to do that. I don't know how to create the sort of oil painting look in the computer. But that's what Dan does for a living. So it became a really fun and quick collaboration where I did the wireframes or pencils of the cover, and then he digitally painted it. So that's what all four issue miniseries for Brain Boy. That's how we did all the covers together. And we also did 4 issues, the covers for 4 issues of a book called Skyman, and we did a couple of other things too, a couple other covers. And it's really fun to work that way. It's actually, I think it plays to my strong suit of working out layouts. Hopefully they're dynamic and fun, but it puts most of the burden, honestly, onto the digital painter, who has to laboriously make everything look hand tuned and stuff like that. So it's a pretty fun way to work, though.
One of the things I've always enjoyed about your work, and it's something I think that really struck me when you took over Robin. That was where we first met you. When you jump on a project, you really kind of get into the theme of the project, and you develop like a personal sense of, how am I going to communicate how I see this project? You see that with the cover of this, you see that with the interiors of this. There is a world that you are like embracing and becoming a part of, and we as the readers are drawn into this world that you're crafting. Every one of your projects is unique because of that. It's something that I, as a fan of your art, really enjoy, because I love seeing what you're going to do next, because there's going to be that familiarity, that unique Freddie that I love, that thing that's your style, because you have a certain style to your work. But there's also a unique nature to each project that makes it always fresh and exciting and interesting. With this and the spy setting and the superpowers and the ability to mess with astral planes and things like that, this world is very rich and unique and different from other projects that you've worked on. And I've been enjoying this miniseries greatly because of the fact that with Brain Boy, the character's now going to new places from where he was originally when we've seen him. We're seeing more of the other characters in his world who have similar power sets, which is leading to some unique visual and storytelling opportunities that we're seeing in this. And I'm greatly enjoying the book.
Thanks. And for people who don't know the history of Brain Boy as far as an actual intellectual property, it was a character from the 60s from a company called Gold Key. So it was a Gold Key character that was, it was purchased by Dark Horse, I don't know, a couple years ago or something, and they reprinted the original Brain Boy stuff from the 60s. And the character was a Secret Service agent that had psionic abilities, and he had this bright blue, just because this was the coloring, limitations at the time or whatever, this bright blue 3-piece suit. He did some pretty, I wouldn't say, not dark as in gruesome, but dark as in kind of intense sort of stuff. For when you're reading his original storyline, that stuff was, you would assume, would be a little more pippy or charming or something like that, just because of the era that it came out of. But in the old, the Gold Key stuff, he actually went down to South America and assassinated or controlled a dictator into assassinating himself or something, killing himself, but it was because of Brainboy's powers and stuff. Or it was something like that. It's been like a year and a half since I read the story, so I might not be getting the details correct. But in any case, Dark Horse purchased the rights, and now they have them as part of their superhero line. And they, instead of, because like the name Brain Boy is kind of an awkward name, but they made it where it's basically a nickname that people have given to him, like the other Secret Service agents call him Brain Boy, and so that's not what he calls himself. He hates that name. Mm-hmm. And to me, that was a good answer to having this really ultra cheesy name. Like Brain Boy is a very cheesy name, but it was a good way to kind of incorporate, to keep the name, but also bring him in on the joke where he's like, "Don't call me Brain Boy." He says that all the time. He only has to refer to himself once as Brain Boy, but that's because they don't recognize his real name. This was in Dark Horse Presents, anthology, where we did a couple of 8-page stories. Like, he identifies himself as his real name, Matt Price, I think is his name, and they don't know who he is, so he has to like go, "I'm Brain Boy," like just so they'll know who he is. But anyway, Brain Boy is very much like it. Not that you guys know my friends from high school, but back whenever I used to do a lot of role-playing games, I happened to play a lot of psionics as the character class or the power set, and he actually has there's a lot of overlap, in my psychology, the type of imagery that I would use when drawing those psionic characters, or in my mind, what they were physically doing or something, the way they hold their hand against their temples or project the energy, kind of focusing it through their hand or something so it's out in front of them. A lot of that I was able to, express in Brain Boy, the visuals of Brain Boy. So I kind of had a head start on Brain Boy, that I've always liked psionics and was real familiar with the type of imagery that I wanted to use.
That's something I thought was really cool with whenever he's firing off, whether it's telekinetic blast, mind control, whatnot. It's the geometric shapes and just the various prism, and this how it came out. It's not a beam, a blast. It's kind of like it flows from him, and I thought that was a really cool visual look for it.
Thanks. That was the type of circles in the old Gold Key stuff. They did not have a representation. They did not have him with a power signature. So when he was using his ability, you did not know, there was no energy coming from him or something. So if he was controlling somebody's body and having them like move against their will, the artist would just draw like little tension lines around the person's hand or something like that to show that they were struggling. But sometimes it was weird because, you weren't sure. Visually, it did not make clear. There was no shorthand to say Brain Boy is doing that thing. It just seemed, it just seemed like Brain Boy was watching them do something in some panels. So that was one of my first emails to Jim Gibbons, my editor at Dark Horse, was about establishing a power signature, like a visual shorthand that said, even if nobody else sees it, it's just a key to the reader that he's using that. And then that evolved into his power signature. The power signature evolved into a visual motif, like the symbol on his chest, and then even in the background of his logo, the swirl that was there, that was supposed to key in both, just circles as his power signature, but also like the sort of cheesy looking swirl that we've all seen in Acme cartoon, like Warner Brothers cartoons, where like the Wile E. Coyote or something will pull out this weird looking pinwheel that has that weird spiral on it, and then he'll spin it to try to hypnotize the Roadrunner or whatever it is that he was doing. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So that was kind of like the visual motif, and I thought that was cool. It was a very organic way to build the visuals of the character. First from his power signature, which informed his chest symbol, which also informed the logo for the book.
I like the opening of this because it matches a lot of, I was mentioning James Bond and things like that before. There's this big opening sequence at Albright Industries, or with the Albright Industries weapon, I should say, at the White House. And you see Brain Boy coming in, and it looks like, we didn't know it was Brain Boy at the time, but as the story goes on, that it was Brain Boy. You read it one way when you initially go through the first read of the story, but then even now, having read issues 1 and 2, I've gone back and reread. I'm reading that differently now and starting to wonder if certain things are happening or if there's other forces at work that are causing this scenario, or if it's even really happening the way that it's being laid out because of some of the heady stuff we start seeing later in this world with people with these psionic powers. You start to question what is reality and what isn't in this world. I like that exploration in this story, that as a reader, I'm able to go back and read this. I read issue 1 a couple of times when it first came out and enjoyed that experience. Then I read issue 1 again after reading issue 2 a couple of times. I think the more story that's delivered from this series, the more I start to have things going on in my head questioning on what may or may not be happening in certain sequences. But that opening, we haven't seen how we got to that yet. That is something that I'm really greatly enjoying about that anticipation as the story builds to what actually happened there and what led to that scenario.
Yeah, it's a pretty trippy way to open a series, isn't it? Like, even I was surprised when I was reading the script from Fred, the writer, that, I was like, well, where is this going to go? Because, there's some projects that I work very collaboratively with the writer, and then there's other ones where I'm just as much into suspense as the reader, just get the script a little earlier than they do, I have now finished issue 4, so I'm now ahead of it, and I understand how it ends and everything. It's a good payoff. It's a good way to cap off the miniseries. But when reading the first issue, and actually even the climax of the second issue, I'm like, where is Fred going to go after this? Like, what is it that... it really is like the cliffhanger where it's like the main character's fallen off a cliff or is hanging onto the edge of the cliff, and you just don't know what the next thing is going to be. So you want to tune in to find out what the next thing is. So fun stuff and weird, gripping, attention grabbing as well.
Each issue in the mini, because a lot of times with a mini, that's the episode, if that makes sense. Like all 4 issues together is the beginning, middle, and ending. The one thing I've really liked about how this particular mini's been playing off is each issue feels episodic. Like there's a cliffhanger at the end, which that's normally something you see in a monthly series versus a mini series. And I quite like it with what Brain Boy is and the nature of the tone of this series, that there's usually something at the end that's like this big, like, I can't wait till the next issue because I want to see what happened, because we already have this cliffhanger at the beginning, but there's another one at the end of the issue. Then there's another one at the end of the second issue. There's something to that delivery. This series feels very unique. And I think in the comic marketplace nowadays, it's always great when you have something that stands out as unique, that's eye-catching and unique for people to latch on to if they're looking for something new. And I think Brain Boy is one of those in this superhero world that Dark Horse is crafting, that I'm glad that it has that logo. It's intertwined with some of Dark Horse's other series, because I think it'll grab some readership that maybe wouldn't have checked it out previously. And because I think it's neat. It's a unique series in its delivery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's building to something. It's on the front cover, and I can't remember. It's Black something. Project Black.
Project Black Sky.
Black Sky. That's what it is. Yeah. That, honestly, I don't know much about that either. I think it's cool that it's building to something. I had dinner after Seattle Emerald City Con. We went. Me and the writer and the editor for the series all went and had dinner. Also, Kiki was there, although she was she did not have a whole lot of input on the story end of things. She was just listening. They were describing to me some of the stuff they have coming up even after the series wraps and stuff, and it's cool stuff they're doing. I don't know who all is writing it, and I'm not even sure who the artist is, but it's cool interlocking across multiple books. I know that Skyman, Captain Midnight, and what else? There was something else. A couple of X, the character X, and some other stuff that they're all interweaving together. And I really like that sort of interconnectedness. It shows a real concerted effort on Dark Horse's part to have an immersive, cool superhero line.
And the writer, I really like his work over at Valiant, too, which also has an interlocking continuity. I think nowadays, as fans, we want that in our comic world. Like, we want these characters to be able... Like, we want the eventual meeting between these characters, especially when they're unique and interesting, to see how they interact with each other. But I also like their separate stories, and where their personal world is very rich and well evolved. There's something to that. I think you meet two different audiences.
That comes out of having the interlocking stories and stuff.
Yeah, because I guess it adds that kind of reality too, that there's more in the world that's unique and interesting, and it also, I think, for the main character, like if you're a Brain Boy fan and you get pulled into the interlocking nature of this because your latch on point was Brain Boy, which is me, that's who I am. It will draw you into seeing the other characters and how they eventually interact with Brain Boy, and that might make me a new fan of X. That might make me a new fan of, I don't know if Ghost is interacting with this or not, but they have a number of heroes that they're developing over at Dark Horse. For me, I'm that new fan that they're looking to target to pull me into some of the other series. So when you interlock them like that, I'm like, wow, I'm really enjoying this entry point into the world for me. You got me. You got me hooked in this story. This is a good chance to pull me into some of the other characters that might be rich and interesting for me. That's where the interlocking works. I'm not forced to read them because Brain Boy stands on its own, but because this is so good, it will make me open-minded to read some of the other things because I want to see, is there similar quality out there? What are they doing storyline-wise? It's a good move.
Yeah, I agree. And Fred seems to be pretty deeply involved in that planning and stuff. And so far, I haven't seen anything from Fred that I've disliked. And usually, if I'm working with a writer and some of the other stuff I've read I don't really enjoy or something, I just won't say anything about it because I don't want to, put them down or tell somebody else that they shouldn't like something. But the stuff that I've read of Fred's is intriguing. It's got both the big scope and the small scope stuff. So it's got good, small level character development stuff. And then it's also big, as in the rest of the world big as well.
Miss Delacourt is probably one of my favorite characters because I keep looking to see what's going to happen to her next.
Yeah, her powers are like, basically she has experimented on herself in the past. So she's got unpredictable, spontaneous, or randomly occurring mutations that happen to her. So beginning of issue 1 of Brain Boy, she's got big gorilla arms. And one of the previous miniseries that I only drew issue 0 of, and then somebody else drew issues 1, 2, and 3, which is the previous miniseries right before this. I remember seeing she had in one panel she had like a centaur's lower body, like a horse's lower body, and then in another one she had like some sort of weird like velociraptor legs or something weird like that. Like something weird is always happening with her, and there's some other mutations that I draw later on, but I can't remember what is in what issue. And sometimes those are called for in the script, and other times it's just like make sure you just add something weird. Like that's kind of the direction.
Make something weird. Nice.
Yeah.
Kind of wondering on something, because we're doing an assault on the White House, so you have to, of course, have the president. And when you're drawing the president, were there legal stuff saying, hey, you can't make it look a perfect representation of the president because then you have to have sign off on likenesses or anything like that? Or was this something that, how does it come about where you get to create the image of the president in this universe?
First, let's make a comment on how many, I don't know the exact number, obviously, but how many comic books feature our president, Barack Obama. Isn't that astounding? Like, I wonder if Obama is an actual comic book fan, and if so, if it's cool, or even if he's not, just how he feels about seeing himself in so many comics. Because, wow, probably the only other president that I can think of that would maybe, I don't know the numbers, of course, but like would maybe be the next runner-up or whatever, be in contention for the most drawn comic book character would maybe be JFK, because there would be like a lot of stories that key off of like his assassination or that time period, or like the Cuban Missile Crisis where they would show JFK, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
it's just it's astounding. And I've drawn him on a couple of covers for Skyman, and let me see, I've seen him on all sorts of stuff. It's cool. But I think that and he's a very handsome man, so Obama is very easy to draw in a comic book way. His face is not a 1-for-1 for a comic book face, you know what I'm saying? But it's pretty similar. It's actually pretty easy to draw because of that. No, I don't think there's nobody has mentioned, to my knowledge, because he's a public figure, similar to celebrities, you can get away with a lot more than if he was not a public figure. I'm not sure what the degree of similarities. Plus, we're not drawing him in not that I could consider like a disparaging sort of manner. So I don't know if it would come up even if there was some sort of a reason that there would be like a PR problem. I guess what I'm trying to say is even if there was like a legal problem, I'm not sure if they would care. We're not actually claiming that a psionic superhero broke into the White House and that's exactly how Obama had reacted, under those circumstances or something. It's all clear that this is a comic book. So
I have to ask about the page. Brain Boy is a jerk. That's such an homage, right?
Yes, that is. In the script, Fred had wrote that he wants, her name is Louisa, if I'm not mistaken, or Louise or something, and he wanted her to be standing in a page that looks very much like, and then he linked an image. And I'm not familiar with where that comic book comes from or, that image or anything, but yes, apparently it's an established image that it's not a meme necessarily because it doesn't have that sort of repetition or post. It's not like viral or anything like that, but it's an image that has been shown or has been used multiple times, though.
My first memory of it was an X-Men issue. It was 168. And it's Kitty Pryde on the front cover pointing, Professor Xavier is a jerk. But it's been used so many times over the years, mainly because of the fact that it's an iconic image. And it was perfect right here, because I'm like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I really had to change was the position of the hand, the pose and the position of the hand. The rest of it was very, very, very similar, intentionally similar to the source material. I just wanted to make the hand what I felt to be more dynamic, But the rest of it was, straight out of the reference.
I love when you have relationships like this, where you've got a character with powers. The powers get in the way of the relationship, because she's asking some really good questions here. Because during our relationship, like, how many times have you done this? Where you start, and it's a danger to any power set that you have, where I'd like to think that if I got superpowers, I'd have a morality and I'd have a code and I wouldn't do things like that, but the temptation would be there. And that's, I think I appreciate when sequences like this are explored, because you see the remorse in him, but it's also, this is who he is, this is his ability, this is his world. It's almost like the way that we do any skill that we have. If you're a psychologist, I think that there's a nature when you communicate with even those closest to you to bring some of work home with you. Yeah. I think it's very normal. We all do it. Whatever our skill set are, they tend to bleed over into our interpersonal relationships in ways we probably don't even realize, because these are things that are second nature to us. When it's explored here, this is the kind of stuff that adds reality to a comic to me. This whole sequence, I think, was just brilliant, because there's parts where he's genuinely taken aback by things that she's saying, and I agree with her 100%.
Well, with the same sort of, on the same topic, is like, if you're a politician or if you're an actor, imagine if you were dating or married to a politician or an actor who, for a living, they not necessarily in a negative, but they, in quotes, manipulate how people perceive them. They have to be, or they can be, very conscious of their body language, which communicates an awful lot to people that they're not aware of. Like, most communication is actually nonverbal. It's about pitch of the voice, but also about like eye contact and body language, emphasis on certain words, or how people speak, like what is it called? The tempo of which they speak. That's not the right word, but you know what I mean? The speed of which they're speaking and that sort of thing, if they're measured with their words and all this other stuff. And politicians and actors, they sometimes, they go to class for those things. They're very conscious of that stuff. That, obviously those aren't superpowers, but it's maybe the closest real world analog that we can get to here. Those are fun acting moments, hopefully, in the comic. Like, me drawing the comic provides for fun acting moments where I can try my best. That's my version of acting. It's like, I'm trying to picture in my mind their body language and the subtlety of their facial expressions and that sort of thing to make hopefully convincing. Brain Boy is not going to outwardly say, I am remorseful, like that would be bad writing. So he's going to say something, but I'm going to try to visually communicate it as well.
The emotions that were just shown on this one page, where they, after the initial fight where he's just going through and he's trying to convince her, hey, this is how much I care about you. I could manipulate you right now. I could even be doing it subconsciously, but I'm not because I love you.
Yeah,
and
so
it's
creepy.
And I love the look how he had that pleasant, friendly, where he's trying to, then when she's like, yeah, you could. And then just that look of, oh, crud, on his face. I tell you, I've seen that look in the mirror multiple times when I'm trying to convince somebody. I'm like, oh, nuts, I just said the wrong thing. And you realize that. And I was like, that right there, I completely was absolutely just this artwork here, these 4 panels side by side have this great emotional expression. Even if you don't read the words, you see it right there in the artwork. This is a huge bravo, man.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I think we've all been there before. Where you're trying to sell yourself in a situation where you're trying to sell your point of view. We all have put our foot in our mouth where you're trying to convey a thought, a feeling, an idea, a justification, whatever, and you know that you overspoke or underspoke when you were trying to convey that idea, and by one line, one word, one thought, you changed the whole tone of the conversation, and you've shut it down to the point where, like, in some cases you're lucky enough to be able to get into a recovery mode or maybe start the conversation over again and better serve it. Other times it's done. It's you, no matter how horribly you misrepresented yourself, there is no way back. The loneliness of his world. One of the things that strikes me about this character, and it's an interesting balance with him, because of the way that he's so guarded when he deals with people, you need sequences like this to start becoming attached to him and find him an endearing character. This sequence to me is critical because I want to like him. And I also like the way he deals with others, where he's a little bit more brash, he's a little bit more cocky, he's a little bit more, because of the fact that he knows a lot of what people are thinking, he doesn't always respect everybody in his interactions with them. So when you see this side of him, it's important for us as the reader to see this facet, because this is where I'm like, oh, I really like this dude. Where other sequences, if you didn't have this, you might not feel the same way. And that's what I find intriguing about him and unique, is that you need this to like him, because you are going to play around with another aspect of his personality when he's in more of the government role. It's cool.
Yeah, and let's face it, that his girlfriend is right. Mm-hmm. His girlfriend is like, to think about somebody essentially able to manipulate your mental sovereignty at will, and possibly has done it multiple times, and that's some really scary stuff. If somebody's a body language expert I've seen not a body language expert do this, but Stephen Colbert on the Colbert Report, hopefully I said that right, he doesn't sue me, but he did he basically set up a congressman where or senator or something, where he's talking about something that's going to happen. They're on location for this interview, and they're talking about a special works project or something that's going to happen up over the hill. And so Stephen Colbert, when he gestures to the project that's going to happen on the hill, the way he moves his hand is very Nazi salute-esque, like where you extend your right arm and you've got, instead of pointing with one finger, you're pointing with your whole hand, and you know what I'm saying? Like you could make a gesture to anything to indicate it, but he just did it in a way that looked like a Nazi salute. And the senator or the governor or whatever, just by being in rapport with Stephen, mimicked the same motion. So there was, for their funny interview, they were able to use that to make it look like they were both saluting a Nazi flag or something, or talk about Nazi. But it was a way that, as a joke, and it was clearly a joke, and Stephen Colbert even made reference to it, that he, in other words, it was clear that they didn't actually try to pass this off as a serious, real thing. That's a mental manipulation. And to think that somebody actually has superpowers to be able to do that, it would almost be, you could never really, it would be hard to ever trust them, because you would always think, am I having these thoughts genuinely or not?
You think about like people who are psychiatrists and psychologists and stuff like that, and even a lot of the cop friends that I have, when they are interacting with people, it's a natural, they go into cop mode or they go into shrink mode, and they just naturally start analyzing a situation and breaking down the little stuff you're saying and how you're saying this. And it can get very annoying when you're talking to, especially guys who've done it for like 20 plus years, who they can sit down and, oh, the way you were talking about that person, you really don't like them, do you? I'm like, what are you talking about? They're a great guy. Like, no, you did this, this, and this while you were said their name. I'm like, what are you talking about? And subconsciously you're throwing stuff out there, or maybe you're not. Maybe it's just the way you talk. But they're trained to look at those things. And it's, it can, it's funny because it's not powers. It's something learned. It's just something second nature to them. But it does make things interesting.
Yeah, it really changes the dynamic into, it makes you very self-conscious, because you're not sure, I'm trying to communicate something to you, but you're looking past that and picking up on things that either, let me see, I'm communicating something, whatever I'm trying to communicate to you, I'll tell you, okay? You reading past that is kind of unfair. Like, there's a social agreement we have that we're trying to communicate on this normal sort of level, but you've taken it beyond that, and you've applied science to it, and now I'm not sure where we're at. Are we communicating in the way that I'm used to communicating, or is it this other level? It's weird how much we're talking about this, because really the sequence is only like a 3-page sequence, or 4 pages, you know what I mean? Like, it's not a real big chunk of the story, but I just find that it's not often you can have a superhero story or superpower story that also applies so much to real life. I remember I was talking to Agnes Grabowska, I think is how you pronounce her last name. She draws My Little Pony and a bunch of other, the art style is called chibi, very cutesy, but very dynamic still at the same time. We were at a convention together, we've all had dinner, her and Kiki are friends and all this. And I was describing that body language can play a role, when you're at your booth, as far as being approachable or not by customers, I get people who know exactly who I am. They've had commissions from me before. They've, whatever that we've emailed and stuff like that. And so they just come right over to me and we'll chat like we're friends. But then there's a big contingent of people who have never heard of me, and they're just walking around at a convention. And just, subconsciously, if they're scanning the crowd of tables, they're not going to come over to a booth, most likely not going to come over to my booth if I'm standing there with my arms crossed with a unpleasant look on my face, I look like I'm not happy to be there and all this. So you have to, it's almost like sending out good vibes in a way. You have to stand there with a more open body language and an open body or facial expression and that sort of thing. Agnes was saying that she found herself every convention now, I'm not sure, keeping herself in check, where now she doesn't know how to stand, and that's not what I was trying to tell her. I wasn't trying to, make it hard for her to be herself. It's just more like, if you're standing there with your arms crossed and look like you're bored, people are less likely to come over and chat because you look like you're bored. You look like you don't want to be there, instead of just make yourself look a little more interested, and people are whatever. I've talked too much about it now.
You know what, though? There is a point to all of that. And it's one of the reasons why I think we're spending so much time talking about this sequence. I think, to me, art in comics and in the world in general, one of the hardest things to convey is real emotion. Where you can sit there and say, I've been in this situation before. Take out the powers and all that kind of stuff. We all, that sequence of events as I'm, looking through it, I've been there. I mean, we've all been there. Sometimes we've been on one side of it. Sometimes we've been on the other. Usually we're on Brain Boy's side of it. But the sequence and the pacing of it was something that I really appreciated because of the emotion. And you could relate to it. It's taking something that we can't relate to because we don't have those powers and things like that, but we have flaws. We're human. There are times where we've had to have these deep discussions, whether it's with somebody a lover that we're dating or married to or whatever, or it's a family member or it's a close friend. We've been on this type of path before. It usually comes from the not knowing how to have enough empathy for their side of it, because he clearly doesn't completely understand her point,
right?
And where the fear would come from it. And that part was really conveyed, because like he's the friend that I could see sitting there saying to him, now listen, don't manipulate me, but just so you know, she's got a point, because, dude, your first line should have been, hey, I'm telling you about this because I know it was wrong. Here's why it was wrong. He never said that. And she was looking for a specific set of words from him that never came out of his mouth. Mm-hmm. I love that as those pages ended, I was thinking about them way more than I should have. I think that's something that's very unique to the comic book experience, because it's thought-provoking, and the idea behind what you guys do when you convey a story is to lay out things that get people thinking and using their imagination to fill in between panels and to fill in dialogue and things, because you're moving on to the next scene. The idea is to create a resonance where people do that. And it was a sequence like in 3 pages where a lot was told in 3 pages. If you don't read comics the right way, if you don't take the time, I hear about people all the time that like breeze through comics in a very short sitting. And I'm like, how do you do that and not like go back and catch everything that you clearly would have missed? Because I've done that. I've sat down and done a quick read of a comic. I'm not saying I don't do that. It's usually my first read through. It's usually the time where, I'm just kind of delving into the story and doing that. Half the joy, though, is going back again then and really basking in the story. It's the same thing we do for favorite films. I think film is probably the best example. There are so many great films that I love watching over and over again, because there are things that I miss. I do it with TV shows, too, though, where it's a favorite show where there's a lot of content to it. Usually it's a lot of stuff that's gone into syndication, where there's an opportunity to watch I'm like, I love that episode. And I'll kind of journey through it again and catch things that I missed before. But comics in particular, I've found a ton of value in going back and reading a second time, because there's so much I don't catch the first time through, and it's stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think that's great, and it's a good way to get additional value out of your purchase of the comic. And it's also there are times that the kind of stuff that artists in general put into the backgrounds or the nuances or something like that, you're not real sure what people are going to get out of that. There's that first level of enjoyment, which hopefully they'll enjoy it, just from the skim or whatever. If I've been drawing the page for 12 hours and I put in way more work in my mind than what anybody else is going to get out of the book, it's cool to think that there are some people who are getting something out of it that's beyond just the initial sort of level. It's like the film analysis or something like that, where people are looking for the level 2 and 3 information that the filmmakers put into the story. In other words, it can be appreciated, and it didn't just get unnoticed or something like that. So, from comic book professional viewpoints, we also appreciate it if somebody is putting that, is recognizing or enjoying it on that level as well.
Tell me we haven't all been in the situation where there is something going on in our life and we want to delve into work to get away from it. I mean, it's funny. I found the first issue of this Brain Boy miniseries was the one where I'm like, wow, I'm really connecting with this dude in a way that I never had before. And I don't mean that in a negative. I think on any journey with a character, you get to know them gradually. And there comes a point in time where you're like, I get him now. And that's never in the beginning. That's something that if a character's got depth to them, you need to gradually be immersed in the world to get to know. It's like a friendship. It really is like developing a friendship. This issue in particular was where I'm like, wow, I'm really like hanging with Brain Boy now. It's a different sort of relationship with the character than I've had previously. And I love that his boss has tentacle arms now. that's actually a question I have for you. That's my experience as a reader. When you as an artist are working on a character, because, you started with him initially back in the initial kickoff of the character, and in the kickoff of the revamp of the character. Do you have a get-to-know-you period with the character? What does that work? How is that for you? Or is it different characters work differently for you as far as your relationship with them?
Yeah, they do work different. Like, there's some characters that I just frankly never click with, and I'm just doing my best to get what I can out of it, or, I'm just doing my best to be a professional and deliver a serviceable performance or outcome or something. That is not the case with Brain Boy because for me, there was a built-in background with me doing, so many role-playing games that he kind of overlaps with the same type of character and that sort of thing. So I felt like I got to know the character pretty quickly. There was enough time on the Dark Horse Presents stuff back when I first established the revamp of Brain Boy and stuff, that I was able to create several style sheets. What I personally call visual reference profiles, but they can also be called style sheets or character sheets for consistency and that sort of thing. And I was able to kind of explore my feelings of how the character should look and get some input from the editors and stuff. And sometimes you don't have that's a luxury that we don't necessarily have because, time is of the essence, so much so that if I get thrown into the middle of a comic book project that's already, late or behind or whatever, you don't really have the time. You just kind of have to pick it up as you go, and you get to know the characters a little bit at a time. Like if you draw him or her a total of 30 times throughout the book, because that's how many panels they appear in, by issue or by panel 30, you've gotten to know them better than on panel 1. They probably even have evolved a little bit visually or something. So with Brain Boy, I was able to get to know the character even beforehand, and also having read the old Gold Key stuff that Dark Horse had made available to me. Both of those helped to inform my choices, how I would show the character visually, and that was the best way for me to get to know the character ahead of time.
Do they, when you guys are taking a character that's like from Gold Key, I don't know how licensing works with that or how that type of situation works. Do they want you to stay really close to what Gold Key did? Do they want you like thematically to stay near what Gold Key did, but to modernize it? Do they give you kind of some direction on that, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's a combination. There's going to be some things like Brain Boy in its original incarnation. His character his name rather was something I think he gave to himself, and there was no embarrassment by the name. In the more recent, our version of him, he doesn't like the name and that sort of thing. So he's frustrated when people call him that. So stuff like that, it's ahead of time, there's going to be an assessment by the editors and at Dark Horse of what's going to be the approach of this character, so that we can present something that's similar and harkens back to the original version. But because, Brain Boy is not a real common, it's not like a lot of people had fond memories of Brain Boy necessarily. He wasn't, prolific or iconic in his time. So we were able to change whatever with just the few brief pieces of the recipe. We still wanted him to be probably the youngest agent. We wanted him to be blonde. We still wanted the name Brain Boy, and that he was a psionic and a Secret Service agent. So all those things had to be in the recipe. But it just depends. And I think that Dark Horse actually bought the character outright. So if they had wanted to, they could have dramatically altered him where it almost didn't resemble the Gold Key character. But I think they wanted, if that was what they wanted to do, they saw something interesting and fun with Brain Boy, or else they wouldn't have thought to buy him. So they still wanted something that was held true to at least the essence of what Brain Boy was back in the 60s.
I like the change with the name, the backstory, because there's a different sensibility today.
Yeah.
I could see it back when the series was originally created, him calling himself Brain Boy, you get away with it. It just kind of works back then.
Yeah.
Today, it wouldn't. And I liked the switch because it's funny how you can take little tiny tweaks and it takes a story and brings it into the present day without losing the qualities that makes the creation from the beginning interesting anyway. And that I like that kind of stuff. I mean, it's just it makes the changes make sense. Mm-hmm. I'm going to have to jump back to Faraday, and I do want to do that. But I want to talk about the plane, because I was skimming through the pages and just kind of browsing through some of the things that I really found interesting. And, we talked earlier, we spent a lot of time talking about the creep factor of what his relationship was like with his girlfriend. The reality of how, no matter which side of the fence you're on that, whether you're the person receiving that kind of situation, or you're the one kind of going, I don't get it. That's creepy enough in itself. But when he's on the plane and you've got that situation where in his mind, he's seeing the agent from, his first appearance. It's basically this Gestalt group who has the ability to kind of project an image around him of everybody reacting to him this way. He's going through this psionic attack. That's what I meant when I was talking earlier about like these great cliffhangers. You're left in a really unique cliffhanger situation that I'm an X-Men fan. I grew up loving those books, and you got to see some great astral plane battles. But this is really a unique world when you've got so many characters like this, and it's a larger scale because of that. It's unique to Brain Boy's world. You're seeing some visuals there that I just think are really, really stunning. Messing with your head, losing some sense of cognition, somebody attacking that is a big worry of mine. That would be a phobia of mine, losing your sense of self, your sense of memory, and all those things. So when I see sequences like this, there's a terror to that is very unique versus a physical terror. Mm-hmm. And I really enjoyed how that sequence played out, because there was a scary horror to it that was subtly built from her first appearance to seeing everybody looking like her, to then this attack from outside the plane that we didn't quite know what it was in the first issue. It was just really well handled. There was an emotional, like even him like clinging to the side of the plane from the inside. I'm like, wow, that's like this sense of him trying to get away from this thing that's all going on inside his head.
Yeah, and he's not aware that that's inside his head, so it's a very visceral sort of reaction. But yeah, I think that there's one of my worst sort of fears, most of my worst fears, I mean, other than just having dumb luck, having a 747 crash into your house, or, that would be pretty terrifying, because no matter what, you can't really prepare for that. It's just like this unforeseen thing. You're minding your own business and whammo. Nobody wants to lose their physical abilities, but I think that, we're all aware that as you get older, you diminish in physical capabilities, but the real fear is to lose yourself as you get older, especially if you've ever seen or had any relatives that have like Alzheimer's or something like that. If you've ever seen the results of that, it's horrific. It's terrifying. And if anyone listening to this has that has somebody in their family who is going through that, that's not me making light of it. That's me acknowledging just how serious and world-changing, that is. So, that it kind of connects to that, I think. It's like, you just assume that as you get older, you're going to get weaker or whatever it is because your physical body's going to wear out, but you always will hold on to that sense of self. And so if somebody or something is messing with your brain or your perception of reality, that's like a different level of terror, and one that, to be honest, most people couldn't really combat. We're not really equipped with those tools.
No, your point's well met, too. My grandmother went through Alzheimer's, and she lived around the corner from me. So, I saw, all the stages. Yeah. Because she stayed at home probably longer than she should have. But, I don't know what the rule of thumb is there. But I think you're right. That adds to my terror when I see that sequence, because I've seen family members, obviously, as they've gotten older and they've aged, go through the physical in it. I'm not making light of that part of it either. I mean, that's terrible to lose that part of it. A lot of them were very happy and able to compensate because they had their wits and they were able to, their right. Life became very conversational and they had wonderful stories and they went to places and were able to enjoy and be a part of things in a way that when you lose the mental part of it, you're not as present to the situation. And I think that when you see that in Brain Boy, I think it feeds into that fear set. I think we all have a fear of losing anything that's uniquely part of ourselves, and especially when it's something that's taken from us. In the way that sequence showcased it. I'm a big fan of the horror genre in general, and when something is done in a way that's so subtle in the build, it's a gradual build. I appreciate that kind of mood development because I'm a fan of emotion in comics. Obviously, it's why I've always connected with your art, because you really do a great job in pacing a emotional development that is in the dialogue, in the script, to build to a sequence. That's where you get a lot of pop.
Cool. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I take that as a big compliment, and I appreciate it very much.
I want to talk about Faraday because
yes, we have to.
I think this is where Brain Boy is becoming one of my favorite books right now, and one of the reasons why I'm really loving this so much is I think we all dream of being able to be in a comic book world. In the sense that since I was a kid straight on through to today, this is escapist fiction. So the idea is anything that draws you into this. It takes me away from my life and my stresses in my life to a new place. Anything that helps me further connect with that world, I think, is where I feel like it's living and breathing and thriving, is something I appreciate because it adds to that sense of, wow, this is possible. Faraday's life, I had a new job this year. I think we've all done that. There's times where our work, is like a roller coaster. We have some periods where that roller coaster is going very, very smooth. And, you've got a schedule that makes sense to juggle everybody in your life in a way where you feel like I'm present in all the ways that I need to be. But then once you start going up that hill and going down that hill, and sometimes there's 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 surprise hills and curves. It's in life, you sometimes feel it's hard to catch your breath and get caught up. Faraday very much is that person. You can tell that there was a strong relationship here at a point in time for them, and likely, hopefully, there will be again. But they're going through some real tough times right now because of the fact that her work is something that she can't communicate about. And that's something I always admire when you talk about spies or government positions or things like that, where there is a confidentiality clause to the point where you can't tell your loved ones. I feel sympathetic for, and yet I admire the restraint, because I don't know that I would probably be terrible at that job, in the sense that when it's my immediate spouse, being able to keep secrets, I don't know that I could do that.
Yeah.
And it's why I don't think I would be right for those positions. I think it looks super cool. I love that kind of fiction. I love the reality of it. I mean, I admire the people that actually do it. But I would crack, I think, when I was in the situation that Faraday was, which shows how much it's her calling. And I think there's a reality of that, but it does then put the strain at home. I think we've all experienced her strain in our own work getting too much for us, whether it's with a spouse or friends or family, whatever. We've been there. But wow, in that sequence, I was just captivated by the way that all played out, because I understood her husband, I understood her. It was really just a cool sequence.
Yeah, and it'd be very easy to make her a faceless enforcer agent type thing. Fred likes to explore the more personal side of these characters, and he does a very good job at it. So, yeah, that's basically on him. I mean, on him as in to his credit.
The thing I loved about this sequence was, first read through, I'm thinking one thing. Second read through, I'm looking at it, thinking another. Because first time I'm reading through it, I'm like, this guy's gonna be a jerk. But then you read through it a second time, you start thinking about it, like, this is multiple times this has happened to him. He's got to put his life on hold for her. Doesn't know why. And maybe this is just one of those things where he's not so much a jerk as this is that final straw that broke the camel's back. This is the continuing one thing they argue, one thing issue they have in their marriage. And I love just the, again, emotional expressions that that rage and fire that he has, but then the calmness that she's trying to, just to get him to calm down and just get him to see, hey, this isn't me. I don't want this, but I have to do it.
Yeah, she's obligated.
I think Faraday and Matt, there's a certain commonality there in the sense that there's sort of a relief to work. Work is kind of an escape from some of the stresses of life, but work and who they are at work heavily plays a role in causing the stresses in their life as well. Because that's, it plays out obviously for Matt because of his nature as Brain Boy, but also for Faraday. I love the personal piece of this book and the emotion that's delivered there. This cover for issue 2, I saw this cover for the first time on your Facebook page, and I was blown away then. I actually had it as my... I have a rotating... I have Windows 8, and I have a folder that I use. I'll save... You'll do convention sketches. Sometimes I'll put them in there. I have... on my iPad, I'll take screenshots of, like, covers or, like an art sequence or something like that. Mm-hmm. And because you hit the 2 buttons and you can take, like, a screen capture. And I put them into a folder, and I just have that as my rotating background. So I never know what I'm going to get. Mm-hmm. But it's really great because it's just, there'll be a particular sequence where there's panels in books that I really liked, and I'm like, it's cool to have that stuff come back on my screen, not knowing it's going to be there when they're comics that I really enjoy. It's one of the things I'm really loving about reading my books digitally. It's just kind of like that ability as a fan to be able to say, ooh, I'm making kind of a hit list of memories of great material that's, I'm putting on my computer for myself. And a lot of times I will see a sequence and it'll make me want to go back and reread that issue because that sequence just sparks an emotional resonance to me. But this is one of those that it's actually on my iPad as the background.
Oh, cool.
It's the one that you had on yours. I liked it so much. I do PD at work. This year I've been the tech integrationist at my district. And I do professional development for the staff, and one of the areas we have a lot of iPads that we're using with students, so I had to do professional development with them, showing them different ways to use different type of apps with the iPads with students. So every time I plop up my iPad on the Apple TV, I've got this in the background. And it was really great because people were asking questions about where it was from. The way that you originally had it, there wasn't like a designation. So I'd tell people, oh yeah, this is a guy who I really love his artwork, and it's this book called Brain Boy, and it's really cool. And so it was neat. Before I would start the sessions, people would walk in and they'd see this kind of thing on there. And it wasn't something that I consciously intended. I had my iPad up and ready to go for the presentation. And it just became kind of a cool way to have a conversation starter while people were filing in and signing in. It was neat. So Brain Boy for me had at the end of the year this year had a little fun history.
That's super flattering, and I do something similar, but for me it's like Arthur Adams artwork and Jim Lee artwork and J. Scott Campbell artwork because I find all those inspirational, and I have the physical comic books on my shelf here. But I also have a lot of the images from those, like you can go to the Comic Art Fans Gallery, and you can find some people will post like medium resolution scans of the artwork itself that they've purchased or whatever it is. So I'll download those and put those also into a folder that, like right next to me is, my computer's in a screensaver mode and it's showing me all this cool imagery. So I'm happy to be included in that on somebody else's computer. That's cool.
I like his presence with the astral plane, where he's his commentary, and you see it through the visual torment he's going through. I hate the astral plane, which you would think when somebody's got that type of power set, the ability to wisp off somewhere, into the mind, because I think there's times where it's very deadly in the X-Men books, but there's also a romanticism to it, to being able to, like this idea of being able to go in there. I remember Xavier versus Farouk, I think it was. There was a big battle that Xavier went through. And I remember it as a kid being one of those things where I was like, wow, this is really a deadly place. Some of his battles with Jean Grey that were there when Jean Grey was Dark Phoenix, I remember that kind of stuff. Seeing it here and seeing him, it's his unwillingness to be there. You see it in his astral form. And then him explaining, here's why you don't want to be there. Here's what it really is. It's where all the muck goes in people's heads. And you're kind of immersed in all of it. And, it's almost like you need a psychic bath after you've been there. I really loved the dialogue and the visual going together in that, kind of building a mood and a tone for what the astral plane is. In a way, I guess that feels very realistic to... We all hide things in our heads that we know should never be public. When you're somebody like Brain Boy, those things that people, through etiquette, know better... He wouldn't have those hidden from him. He would have to almost close himself off. Not almost. He would have to close himself off in order to avoid those things. And even then, there's probably a danger, as we've seen in his life path, there's a danger of coming across things that you wish you had never come across. Just a great sequence.
Thanks. Whenever I was trying to draw that visually, I'm essentially just trying to draw energy forms, but that kind of, you can start to play with the anatomy. Like on page 1, Brain Boy's astral form is being yanked by 3 of the men from G.E.S.T.A.L.T. I'm trying to make it where he's trying to get, because they have pulled his astral form out of his body, and I'm trying to show his astral form trying to get back into his body. So he's like, some of his appendages are like kind of going a little screwy. Not in a way that they look like they're broken, but they look like they're starting to elongate because he's trying really hard to get back to his home base, so to speak. I don't know. It's cool stuff, like to draw otherworldly imagery that's like that, because we're so rooted in reality usually. And also, I don't think it came off as successful as I wanted it to, but between the cover and then page 1 of issue 2, if you flip back and forth, They had to change, I don't know if you can tell, but on the cover of issue 2, there's like this, on all the covers of the Dark Horse stuff, they have this like white sort of curved border at the bottom of the cover. Mm-hmm. And now I design covers with that in mind. But at the time when we were doing issue 2, that had not been established or made known to me, at least. So anyway, it kind of changed the placement, but I wanted it to be like Brain Boy on page 1, and then one of the guys from G.E.S.T.A.L.T on the cover are supposed to be occupying the same space, kind of. So I wanted it to be like when you flip back and forth, you're almost getting... Do you understand what I'm saying? Like yeah. Anyway, that was supposed to be like a thing I had done, where you flip back and forth, and it was supposed to... I don't know. I just wanted it to be something like a weird experimental... It's like almost a metadata. It's like some sort of a weird... Not a gimmick, because it's not like it's there to sell any extra copies. I just wanted it to be something interesting, but it didn't. It almost ended up not working, kind of, sort of, because the cover sort of changed placement, which then changed the pose relationships between the 2 pages.
I see it with the bottom guy, though.
Yeah.
That's what it's supposed to be, but I don't know, kind of got a little weird. But it's supposed to be weird, so maybe that's all right. I don't know.
But that's this is the thing, though. I'm a big fan of Easter eggs in movies and in DVDs and things like that. Some of them are overt, where you catch them immediately. Other ones are things that the filmmaker put in, that like they were experimenting, playing around with those things. See, to me, you talked about value earlier. Whether you 100% catch everything through multiple read-throughs or not, half the fun with comics and the community that comics have nowadays, and the fact that you can go on forums, you can go in Facebook groups, you can go on Twitter, whatever, is the ability to, I didn't catch it, but this reader did. You know what I mean? It's that kind of community talk. We do that with film. We do that with television. It's an important role to do that with comics, because of the fact that artists like yourself and writers and everybody who's putting together comics are trying to do things like that. They're playing around with the medium. They're trying to challenge it. And I think to me, what makes it an art form is the fact that it's constantly being challenged. If it was static and it's the same thing that they were doing, actually, Brain Boy's a great example, same thing they were doing back in the 60s, it would be, they'd get to the point where it's like, okay, what's new, fresh, and exciting in comics? Well, everything, because it's constantly evolving and changing. People are creative. They're trying new things. They're fans that grew up with it, and they're like, wouldn't it have been cool if we could have done this? Well, now we can. And it's that kind of stuff that I love. Whether I catch it or not is irrelevant for me. I appreciate looking, going, now, hey, wow, that's neat.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And whenever I show comic books to people, nowadays, in quotes, nowadays, there is a huge difference from when, it's not just a huge difference in paper quality that tends to be, I don't know why, but that tends to be the first thing that people mention. Oh, look, it's on like the paper I was used to was like the old newsprint. And I get that. I didn't even so much mind the newsprint, but it's like I want it to be the craftsmanship of the amount of work that's been added to the penciling, the inking, and the coloring. It's like the guys worked very hard back in the 60s. I'm not putting that down, but there's a different level of the standards of art consistency and quality and all this stuff have changed quite a bit since then. I do think they're higher now. And I'm not speaking about myself specifically. I'm saying just the artistry in general in comics has dramatically increased. And part of that is because of the sale of original artwork. So people are some artists are attempting to illustrate something on a level that people enjoy on 11 by 17. It's like, I'm going to do a level of detail that won't just look good at the 7 by 10, whatever inch size of a printed comic, but I want it to look good at 11 by 17, which totally changes the scale of detail you're adding, But anyway, I've kind of gone off on a tangent, but that's nothing new for me on the show. But you know what I mean?
But they're good tangents because those are things that we as the readers don't think about. And I think comics are one of the great things about comics if you look through the history of comics. And I'm a fan of looking at the history of comics and how it's developed over time, not just from my experience. Like, I've been reading since the 70s, but, I always liked comics that came out long before I was ever reading, right back to the original history of comics. It's fun to see each era, because of it having limitations, they had to, as the ability to try new things came onto the scene, you got to see greater experimentation and greater build. And I think we are at a really cool era right now that with the tools available today, there's very few limitations to creators except for time. That's really one of the realities of comics. Time is really...
Yeah. Time is such a big commodity. It does come down to that. I think I'm paraphrasing. I think it was Neil Adams. Is it Neil Adams who said this? Whatever the case. I'm trying to give credit so it's not like my original way of saying it, but it's like, no, maybe it was Jim Lee. But I know that Neil Adams also was talking about this in a different interview, but that basically in the artist's hands is, Neil Adams said that it was like $150 million movie, but it's all just in his hand. But I think that Jim Lee said something like, you have an unlimited budget, except, money-wise, if you were thinking of it in the terms of a movie, because you can do anything you want to on costume. Your special effects budget is as high as you want to go. Your research and development costs are as high as you want to go. You can cast any number of types of characters as far as, you can make them look incredibly handsome and charming or beautiful and sexy or whatever. But the only real budgetary quantity is your time. It's just time constraints. And it's also, the skill of the artist as well. But I think even that comes down to time constraints because if, somebody feels underqualified to do a type of story, they can spend a little bit more time if they have the time to kind of compensate for that. Like, I've never drawn a horror story before that has like lots of, huge shadowy sort of negative space and all this stuff. So I'll take an extra week on this project to really work on my layout so I can plot out my cast shadows and all that other stuff. Anyway, yeah, it's right up. You're right on with it. But that was some of the stuff that I had heard in the past that I thought stood out to me.
That's actually that same thing. It's actually a good message for people that are aspiring artists, trying to find that balance. Because I can imagine that for yourself and for any artist. The trick is when you're working on monthly deadlines, trying to make sure you don't want to spend if I spend all my time on the special effects, we don't have any characters. It's kind of a reality of you have to budget your time to find a balance for the scene that you're laying out, so you have the kind of flash and flare that you want while you still have the strong character depth and backgrounds that you're looking for. It's got to be an interesting for each project trying to get to know what is my pace for this scene that I'm crafting here so I can get everything in on time, looking a way that feels good for me within the time constraints that I'm dealing with. Because the idea would be, in a perfect world, your time and money budget allows you to spend as much time as you want to on these projects. You can't do that. Even in film, you can't do that. But right. they have the ability, because they're crafting a 2-hour movie in, usually many months. They have a different time constraint that they're dealing with. Theirs is a financial budget. You have a time budget that can be awful, I'm sure, at times.
Yeah, because I've been on the show several times, I've mentioned this in probably every podcast that we've done, but I'll just reiterate it because it's more recent examples. But I've taken, for the 4th of July celebration, or for my birthday, which was at the end of May, we had big family sort of get-togethers and stuff, and I have to take whatever I can do. Let's say I know I'm going to be there probably for 3+ hours. Whatever I can do to minimize the impact on my schedule of that time away from work, I have to do it. So that usually means taking a bare minimum setup, either my tablet PC, depending on what stage I am in production or whatever. If I'm on inks and I'm doing it on paper, I'll just take some markers and stuff with me, like microns and Faber-Castell brush pens and stuff, because I'm not going to take my full setup that can get kind of messy and stuff. But I'll just do whatever it is that I can. Now, I won't work the entire time I'm there, but if I know I'm going to be there for 3 or 4 hours, I might work for an hour to an hour and a half, so I've minimized the effect it'll have on my schedule, So for 4th of July, there was fireworks going off around me. The kids were running around, all my nieces and nephews, with the little poppets, the things you throw down, it makes a little snap sound, and barbecue. And I'm sitting in one of the fold-out lawn chairs, with Kiki on one side of me and her family around and stuff. And I got my head down drawing, and the kids are very interested in what I'm drawing. You know what I mean? They're right up. Some of them are right up in my face to see what it is that I'm trying to draw. And one of them, because I had a stack of 3 pages on top of each other, as I was working on the top one, this kid from down the street whom I've never even met, just grabs the top page and starts lifting it up and is like, "What do you have under here?" And I'm like, whoa, let's calm that down. But, and I remember it was Kiki's mom said, something like, "Boy, you can draw anywhere," or something. And it's not, and I just chuckled, because part of it is, it's not that I can draw anywhere, it's that I kind of have to draw anywhere. It's, you just need to, wherever you can find the time. Even when I travel and I'm going on an airplane, when we went to the Arizona show and I was, under deadline, I just took with me a portfolio binder, I put it in my carry-on bag, and then a minimal art setup or whatever, and then just whatever I could work on, just whatever I can work on with pen or something that's not very messy while I'm waiting for the plane. You've got an hour, before the plane arrives, that's an hour you can be working, and you don't have to do that 100% of the time, but you do it wherever you can so that you're not crippling yourself at the end of the schedule, where you're going to have to pull an all-nighter or 2 all-nighters or something.
Do you find that it's funny as you're talking through this, I admire that greatly, because you want to make sure that you're meeting your deadlines and getting everything done. But do you find that sometimes you're in situations where you almost have to be a contortionist in order to get your work done? Because I can imagine if you're on a plane or something like that, do you do that? Try to draw on a plane sometimes when you're doing that, and it's not a big space.
No, it's not. And I have done that. There's actually some photos. I don't know if I posted them on Twitter or not, but back in 2012, I guess, which was the first time we went to Australia. So we went 2012. We also went in 2013, and then we'll be going later on in this year as well to Australia for conventions. And the first time I went, it's I had agreed to go to do the show, and then the next day, my editor had contacted me about doing a cover for Captain Atom, which I was working on and doing the interiors at the time, but they had a different artist doing the covers. And it's if I couldn't do it at a super fast turnaround, then I just wouldn't be able to do them. And so I said, yeah, I'll do it, whatever it takes. And so I drew on, we were on the flight for a total amount of time was actually 24 hours for the entire amount of travel. So that was including the layovers and all that other stuff. And so I drew on the plane. I was using a lot of Sketch and Wash at the time, so I could just do the graphite part of the Sketch and Wash. I could do the sketch, but just not the wash because it was going to be too messy. And then whenever we landed at LAX, I did some actual real wash stuff because we had a 2-hour or 3-hour layover or something. So I just found like a little container and put some ink in it and diluted it with some of the bottled water we had to drink. That's what I brushed. I did a ink wash in the background. And then on the flight, the 18-hour stretch of the flight, which was the one going from LAX to Sydney, I did more of the Sketch and Wash, and I did some micron work because it was a relatively smooth flight. But it's definitely not a comfortable fit, and I'm a pretty big guy. I'm 6 foot tall, and I'm 240 pounds, so I'm a pretty big. My rib cage is very large, so it's not like there's a lot of room between my chest and the seat in front of me. Like if I had a smaller skeleton and was not as fat, then it would be a lot easier to fit the artwork in there. So yeah, it's I don't know, but you don't try to do any of the really finessed type of work in that pose. You do the broader stuff that you can either easily fix or whatever. And on a side note, when we landed in Sydney, then we went to Adelaide. That was the first Australia trip we had. My deadline was basically that day. So we hadn't really slept, and immediately, as soon as we landed, I wrapped up the cover. Wrapped it up as in finished up the drawing of it. And then we had to look for because we don't know where we're at. We're in Adelaide, Australia. I don't know any of the landmarks or where they have like a copy shop, but I had to get it scanned so then I could color the cover. So we called we called around to find a quick copy, and I asked them, do they have an 11x17 scanner? And they don't use inches there, so they're like, what's that? And like in centimeters or whatever, and I was like, I have no idea. But I said, I knew that A4, I think, is the size that we call letter. It's something, it's like they call it A4 or something. So I said, can you put 2 pieces of A4 paper on the scan bed at the same time? And they said, yes, we can. And I was like, okay, then that's good. So I got it scanned. Like we had to get the point is that we had to be very resourceful in that situation. And as soon as pretty basic cover, it was just like more of a bust shot of Captain Atom with his hand up. As soon as we got it scanned, I had to do some preliminary colors and upload it. It was just a weird situation, but it's, that's just what it takes sometimes. You have to be adaptive, and because if not, I'm going to miss my deadline, and it's just not really an option.
You're mentioning your tablet PC. With artists and equipment, drawing tools, or especially now with technology equipment, is there like a place where you collaborate with other artists as far as deciding on equipment, or is it pretty much so up to the artist to decide what works best for them? Like that's always, because I'm not an artist, so that always intrigues me. How does the tool set work for you guys?
When it comes to the traditional stuff, meaning instruments that make black lines onto paper, there's already a pretty established tool set there. So it's going to be, the most traditional is dip pens that are called either nibs, or they're also called quills, and then brushes that you dip into any ink, and that's like the baseline for any inker. And then on top of that, there's going to be microns and rollerball pens and brush markers and that sort of thing. So that's pretty well established, and there's not a lot of surprises in that stuff anymore. Occasionally there's like a new type of pen that comes out and people can use it, or a brush pen or whatever the heck. Like in the last 3 years, there's been Jet Pens, JETPENS.com has put out some really good refillable brush pens that emulate very closely a traditional brush, but the advantage is that it has a cartridge of ink that fits into it, so you don't have to keep dipping it in a well, because the ink wells are very messy and they're problematic because you can spill them and really mess up stuff. But to more specifically answer your question about new technological stuff, that is very much the wild, wild west as far as who's using what. Now, the most standard thing that people is using, because it's a standard for coloring and that sort of thing, is Photoshop, Adobe Photoshop to begin with. And that's, of course, software. But then on the hardware end, right now tablet PCs they're not in their infancy, but there is no clearly established forerunner in that technology. I had the assumption that it would be Wacom. I guess it's actually pronounced Wacom. They have, I'm not joking, by the way, it's Wacom.
Wacom is what I've always heard. And I'm talking about from you. I'm talking in general. That's always what I've heard. Yeah. So it's funny that you correct that. I mean, I'm not an artist, and I've heard that mentioned so many times, probably because as a comic fan, you hear artists mention it.
Yeah, even now that I know I'm technically pronouncing it incorrectly every time, I still say Wacom tablet. Wacom is how I always have said it. And that's how I still say it generally, but I've been corrected several times and have looked it up. There's like online, I think there's like an official, I don't know if it's like on Wacom's website, but there's like some sort of official thing that it actually has like a pronunciation, so it looks like WACK-OM, Wacom, or apostrophe EM, however they had it. Anyway, but the point is that they make a lot of the small like digitizing art pad that are called, there's like a Bamboo or Intuos or whatever, but they have come out with like the Cintiq, which is it's like you're drawing on your monitor, and that's pretty good, but if you have to travel with it, it's very cumbersome because you also still need a computer to bring with you. So some people will there's like a 12-inch size Cintiq screen that you can take with you and hook it up to a laptop. That's a pretty good setup. Dave Yarden, one of my friends who does work for X-Force and X-Men and X-Factor covers, who's an amazing artist. He draws the best Storm I've ever seen, ever. He's an Australian artist that we met in Adelaide in 2012. Great guy, too. But that's the setup he uses, a 12-inch Cintiq screen hooked up to a new HP Hewlett-Packard computer or something. So he uses PC. But what I use is the brand is called Asus, A-S-U-S, and it's almost the exact same size as the 12-inch Cintiq, but it's an all-in-one tablet computer. So it's not just the screen hooked up to a laptop, it is an all-in-one thing, and I like it a lot. It's Asus, the model is a B as in boy, the model is 121, but since then, Cintiq has come out with 2 different all-in-one tablets that I have not tested or used, and I've heard varying degrees of success. I believe that Francis Manipul, who does, currently I think he's doing Detective Comics, but he did Flash for a while, awesome guy and great artist. He's currently using, I think, one of the Cintiqs. I think it's called a Cintiq Companion, if I'm not mistaken. It's an all-in-one computer as well. So anyway, people are all over the map on it. I think as long as it can run either Photoshop or Manga Studio, or there's a program called GIMP, G-I-M-P, GIMP, that some people use, that's a free graphics program, or if you're using Painter or whatever, as long as it can run those things without lagging out greatly, and it gives you the type of line, that it's not having problems with its processor speed where it's giving you a jagged line, any of that stuff is good. The Asus B121 is like a $1,200 all-in-one tablet PC, and I think that's a pretty good deal. That's some heavy cash, but I'm saying if you're looking, as opposed to getting a Cintiq 12-inch and buying a laptop, if you added those two together, it's most likely going to be more than $1,200. So that's one of the reasons that I like the Asus quite a bit, is it's inexpensive and it's still powerful. So take that for what it is. It's not a commercial for any of that stuff. It's actually saying, do your own research, find something cool, and then use that. Don't feel like there's only one specific thing you should get.
That's cool, because I didn't know if I think we all grew up with that whole, we've talked about this before, that whole bullpen assumption that was in comics. And nowadays we know that people are all over the world producing comics. It's not in one set location. So I think when you grew up with that kind of assumption of there being a bullpen, you figure there's probably a supply room and everybody does the same thing on it. Yeah. Nowadays, with technology being such a large part of what you all do, I've kind of had a feeling that it would be up to the creator to find the tools that most met the needs. But software packages sound like they're a big part of that, making sure that everything runs and functions the way that you need it to, whether you're on the go or in studio.
Yeah. As good as the Asus is, there are still sometimes they get jaggy lines because, just processing power and also the levels of pressure sensitivity or I'll have to reboot or something like that because I've started to exhaust the cache memory or something to make the lines start to get clean again or something. So like if I'm working on roughs, who cares? Jagged lines are great. I mean, as long as it's drawing the line and it's kind of the approximation of what I want, then I don't really care. But if it's something like almost any other function, wireframes or inks or colors, I need it to be more smooth than that. So there's some limitations to anything. There's give and take or whatever. But yeah, as long as it can run the software that you need and it's the speed that you need it at and it's within a reasonable budget, then you're good. But yeah, the bullpen stuff, that sounds so romantic. I love the idea of a big group of artists in a studio space sharing supplies and working together, and they're kind of in the trenches together, to the wee hours and stuff. But that is because of technology being convenient for somebody to work anywhere. It's similar to how both of you are you and Jim are not in the same room together necessarily whenever you guys can record a podcast episode because you don't necessarily need to be. Now, it's cool that you guys are within half an hour of each other. That's neat. But it's the same thing with I can be working with writers that are in England or Portugal or something like that, and I'm never in the same room with them. But the disadvantage is it becomes more solitary, and also it's harder to share techniques and tips and that sort of thing with each other because you're so far removed.
One of the things that obviously I'm dating myself as growing up being a Stan Soapbox Mighty Marvel bullpen guy because that was always kind of the romanticism. You're right. I think for us as the fans, and I think it was a good thing when he did that because I think prior to that there wasn't a lot of identification with the people who created the comics.
Yeah,
and I think that was what he did there was an important shift. That I think it's one of the areas where the internet's strong nowadays. I think our awareness of people such as yourself who are creating and bringing this to us as fans, appreciation of following what you do work-wise, I think that's been a positive of the internet. I think that continues to grow, that awareness of who the people are behind the scenes. But I think it's cool that bullpen concept led to, I think, a lot of what are the positives today of understanding who people are instead of being faceless behind the scenes. There should be some acknowledgement and identification of the fact that there are people working very hard every month to put this material out.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah, and the Stan Soapbox stuff, that stuff I read too. I mean, but I guess, yeah, the much younger fans that are getting into it now, they'll be like, what is that? But there is actually, I've seen a book, I think Stanley put out a book that was a collection of those soapboxes or something like that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. I
don't know how much they rewrote or added new material, but it was like a pretty thick book, so holy crap, he wrote a lot of those, I guess.
It's funny how it was kind of a voice of an era. But I do think we do see the benefit of it today. If that era hadn't happened, I don't think we'd have as much acknowledgement as we get today of the people behind the scenes creating comics. I think it is and should be a lot more in front of us. And I think that's cover credits, I think, are incredibly important.
I agree.
With aircraft, when G.E.S.T.A.L.T's coming off to the side, I love that they have this sleek-looking spy aircraft. Because the bad guy stuff should look just as cool as the good guy stuff and have an intimidation factor to it. But the one thing I really loved about this sequence, and it's something that you really had to start showing in the artwork as well, this sense that this was something that, because of overwhelming numbers, this isn't a one-on-one psychic battle, which I think we've seen a lot. This was a full-scale psychic assault. He's getting worn out by this. And these numbers, even though he can split himself, or, which he did, him splitting himself into multiple pieces meant that he's, again, putting more and more strain on himself to do that. And his acknowledgement visually and in the dialogue of that being a part of the battle was, it was a different sort of high-scale combat battle than we're used to with the physicality part. It was there because of the fact that you have these psychic apparitions, or whatever you want to call them, on the astral plane fighting each other. You got all of that. That's that thing that we love. But it was very unique in the sense that the physical body was being worn down by the mental battle. And I loved seeing that because I being a fan of the X-Men, being a fan of just different characters with psychic abilities and things, I don't recall seeing something this kind of scale where you saw a singular character being attacked by so many that G.E.S.T.A.L.T brings to the table. And I find that being a unique thing about G.E.S.T.A.L.T as an enemy. It's kind of got qualities of a whole bunch of things. Things I like in the X-Men, things I like in the Borg, things I like, just in various different media put together in a way that it's a unique, fresh package. And I really like them as an enemy.
Yeah, they're cool. And they, as an organization, I am assuming that they're going to be a part of the Black Sky stuff. Basically, I think Fred has done a good job of establishing them as a larger threat. You know what I mean? That they're not just in Brain Boy's neck of the woods or something.
I like that the enemy that he's fighting, the guy that's in the other plane, he's got to figure out a way to take advantage of the situation because he can't continue fighting this battle. So the idea of, I got to take out the two pilots. It's the only way that I'm going to get a one-upmanship here. It's not. It goes back to that idea. It's not about winning. It's about surviving and going on to the next phase. And I thought that sequence was really, really great because he couldn't beat this guy, but he could set up a situation that would have him survive. It was a victory of sorts, but it wasn't clean. I like that kind of stuff. I really dig creative solutions to overwhelming odds. And that's really what that was all about, and I was engaged by that because I'm like, oh, this is different. I haven't seen something like this. This is cool.
And I liked how you did the horrific scenes of people's head getting blown off, because you show there's still plenty to. I know exactly what happened. I see a pretty good blood splatter, pretty good red mist, but it doesn't go so in depth that I'm seeing the bullet enter and exit. There's enough stuff left off scene that my imagination can create it, especially with the second guy who kills himself. I thought that was a great sequence. It's every natural instinct in your body is to live, and he has to convince this guy to pull the trigger. And just the struggle that the guy goes through, and then finally, when he actually does it, we don't physically see the guy die, but we see the blood splatter on the window. I thought that was a great way to show it.
Yeah, it's not as fun as in the Dark Horse Presents, where I got to draw much more on camera, just because of how odd, such a novelty thing. But yeah, it's actually kind of a pleasant byproduct of sometimes limitations. I mean, that's actually how it was written. And I don't think that Dark Horse, because Dark Horse is overall a more mature, more sort of, I don't know, not risque, because it almost sounds like it's talking about sexual stuff, but I mean just more adult or mature in that it can show more violence than like DC or Marvel or something like that. And I have even drawn more horrific things in Dark Horse books. But yeah, it wasn't really needed there. There's less of a reason for that shock factor if you can hold on to that and then use it somewhere else, so to speak. You don't want to make all your music at high volume or else nothing seems loud. So hold off on that sort of thing until it's actually called for.
I laughed at the parachute sequence. It was really great. The guy landing, because during the whole chaos that was going around, I really liked his enemy because he was sitting there in his seat and like you would think he would be more panicking because of his whole demeanor. Instead, he was very calculating and he looked like he was twisted, a little bit off. There's an evil twinge to him, which you see. And then when he lands and he's pulling out the lollipop, it was I'm like, that was so great. I just loved the sequence because it was a build to that.
Yeah, weird stuff. Fred is really good at incorporating stuff like that. There's like, I'm kind of guilty of this myself, but there's such a desire to make things, in quotes, badass. And like even in movies, if you see, there's a tendency to make things, too badass, and so it's cool to mix that up with quirky little funny stuff every once in a while because it makes the it draws that comparison or creates an extreme or a paradigm or something where you can have things that are kind of goofy or character-like, quirky stuff, and then mixed together with the more awesome or badass or extreme level of violence or something like that. It creates a better sort of scale to it.
This is the perfect time to see Faraday. That's the part where he gets his own gear. And you get to see the flight suit and all that. I'm a big fan of that kind of, because I'm like, oh yeah, this is the part when I was a kid, and I should say the big kid in me geeks out at when you finally see a character don their armor, their gear for whatever purpose. And this was very functional. Considering the situation and what he was fighting against, this was meant to give him an edge so he doesn't wind up in as overwhelming a situation as we saw him in. So I loved that the opening sequence of this issue leads to the reason for him having that suit to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in the context of us as humans who created this, drew this comic book or whatever, that came out of, at the very beginning, whenever I was designing the visuals for Brain Boy for the Dark Horse Presents thing, they originally just had it where he was in the Secret Service uniform. And I had made the suggestion, well, what if we gave him this sort of, originally I called it a amplification suit or something like that to help him focus his powers. And the circle theme was incorporated where he had it could be a monitoring suit as well. And I'm not sure exactly if the functionality I had in mind carried over to what it ended up being, but it kind of stemmed from those conversations that we were having, that they liked the idea of that, and it also made him look and feel a little more superhero-y instead of just wearing a business suit. That was fun you never know in the course of the conversations what's going to kind of catch on or what's going to be cool. You just make a bunch of suggestions and come up with stuff, and then some stuff, kind of takes on a life of its own with the group contributing to it,
I want to geek out over the page where he's trying to get in her head and discover her true identity. But I spent a lot of time on that page because first, the first thing that draws me in is the dialogue because, I want to know her identity, which was the tease there. But then, as I was going through, I spent a lot of time on this page. I started appreciating the reflection in her costume because of the nature of the way her costume works and the fact that we're dealing with, we're outdoors, sunlight, it's wide open area. We're going to see the reflection of his suit in her suit. And that kind of transparency, whenever there's fabrics or metals or things like that, and time is taken to put those details in, I marvel at them because I'm assuming this isn't me as an artist, this is me as the reader, I'm assuming they take a great deal of time, but I appreciate the sense of it takes something that's flat for me and instantly makes it three-dimensional. Now all of a sudden the what she's wearing has a texture of a sort. I'm probably using a horrible word for it, but it has this sense of I feel the material. This is it's shiny. It's got a harder surface and it's reflective and you see it in the glasses straight on through. And the reflection really built that sense for me. It's something that I appreciated, and it's cool when I go back through and I do read-throughs to see sequences like that because I'm sure on your end they have to take a lot of time. It's something that I marvel at because it adds a sense of depth to something that's flat.
Yeah, and that it is more work because I'm drawing, because potentially I could just have drawn her. I wouldn't, if the suit was not shiny, I would not have to draw him. So it's in that specific page, it was twice the amount of work. But I also feel like it's also symbolic for what's happening in the story, that he's trying to read her, but she's rebounding. Her suit is also an insulation suit, so it's rebounding back or just off of her. What he's trying to read in, so he's trying to penetrate her mind, but it's being bounced back, just like a reflection is light trying to hit, but it's not being absorbed, it's being reflected back.
And you see that with the power kind of going around her, but not being able to find its way in. Like, I liked the visual around framing her.
And I don't know if you guys know what cold reading is, if you've ever heard of that before, but he's kind of resorted to, it's basically a series of guesses, but it struck me as kind of like it's cold reading, where he's just like throwing out a bunch of. He can't read the emotion on her face or the body language because she's unchanging, but he's just throwing out a bunch of ideas and hoping that he's kind of right. Like an example of it would be, or this is maybe a bad example, but if you watch Back to the Future, whenever Doc Brown has stuck that suction cup onto Marty's head, and he's trying to figure out, he's just like throwing out ideas. Like he has no idea what he's saying. He's just hoping that it'll work or that he'll get some sort of an inkling from that device. But do you realize what this means? It means to say this damn thing doesn't work at all.
Yeah, fake psychics will do that kind of stuff as well. Yeah. Where they start a general just discussion of, I'm sensing elderly parents no longer with you, and just you throw out a general statement and you get an understanding, and someone will react a certain way, and you watch how they react, and just it's a carny trick.
Yeah, that's where the phrase cold reading comes from. It's basically you try to pick up, you say some general stuff and hope that somebody gives you some clues back in their body language, or if they just actually come out and say it. Like if I'm trying to cold read you and I say something like, I'm getting an older man in your life that has passed away, an uncle or a father or something, and you just flat out say, yeah, my father just passed away. Then I'm like, yeah, it's your father. I'm getting your father. I definitely had a very fatherly feeling to that. And then if the person being cold read is not really up on that sort of thing, then they go, wow, I can't believe he just said my father. He really knew what he was talking about. And isn't that fun?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that funny?
I like the sequence with Faraday when he's flying along and she's basically, ooh, a woman you can't manipulate. No wonder I make you uncomfortable. And that really struck a chord from the first issue. That's the kind of I love that kind of storytelling where there's things that like, wow, this interpersonal drama that's going on in his life plays into sequences where he has this flashback to that, and I'm like, oh, that stung even more.
Yeah. Yeah.
At Brain Boy, we're at that rancho with our little friend coming in. I loved this biker sequence because he was egging them on to get them emotionally off guard. Is that what he was doing there? Because he was all of a sudden getting them angry and ready to attack him, and he used that as a way to take them over.
Yeah. His insults are really funny because you assume that they're all going to be. He's basically saying that he slept with their mothers,
yes.
And he's also calling them homosexual, assuming that that's going to provoke them. But instead, what that does, because this is like a bar full of bikers and hard-looking individuals. What it does instead is it makes them mad because they have a guy in their group whom is homosexual, and so they're just mad at him for having insulted him or for having tried to make being called homosexual as if that's some sort of an insult. So that's what pisses them off, and I think that's a funny twist on it, because some people will feel like their sexuality is threatened, and that's what will make them mad. But it's much funnier that they're just like, no one talks about him that way, or you know what I mean? Like nobody disparages him. I think that's what they said, or something. It was something like that,
You can't come in here and denigrate our gay brothers and sisters.
Yeah,
that was outstanding. I was like, man, that's cool.
When he walks in, though, initially he's saying, and there's no reaction from the crowd. They're just kind of like, they get up and stand and take a look at him. About the mother, when he's in there saying, I just slept with your mothers. They're like that, mild acknowledgement. They get up. One of them looks like annoyed, but at best.
Yeah.
Now, is what's happening there with G.E.S.T.A.L.T, is that multiple members of G.E.S.T.A.L.T coming out of him? Or is that him splitting and feeding into them, a la Brain Boy?
I'm pretty sure that he was just a vessel to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, and so he just had, I don't know, dozens and dozens of spirits or astral projections or whatever they would be called inside of him. So he was just carrying those beings around in him. Those are not split offs, at least to my knowledge. Those aren't just like him fracturing himself to go into multiple people. that's him carrying around a whole bunch of different personas or different, that's why it's the men. It's, I don't know. It's hard to describe, and I might be incorrect just because I'm not 100% sure, but that's just my interpretation.
That matches the beginning, though, because he was getting worn out by the overwhelming numbers, and he was indicating that these were members of G.E.S.T.A.L.T. There seemed to be that implication that these were members of G.E.S.T.A.L.T. that he was fighting, versus when he split himself off, he was implying that wasn't the same thing. He was splitting himself to try and counter the overwhelming numbers, not implying that this was more than one.
And also he was splitting himself off as a diversionary tactic as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's cool stuff. It really is. It's neat. It's I like because to me, if you're doing a spy story, there needs to be a variety of locales. It needs to be something where you get this idea that this is world spanning. They wind up because of the fact that there's planes and jets and mysteries and intrigue, like the car that he comes and discovers and finds, basically has been shot up. Yeah.
Blood-stained.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a big pronounced bloody handprint on it.
When he showed up and recognized that, okay, I cannot just come flying in this costume. I'm going to stick out like a sore thumb. Got to go spy. And I can't certainly dress in my normal outfit either. So he takes advantage of his ability to use his mental powers to blend in as one of them. Of course, finding out that Arcady had his group set up for a potential explosion was a great ending.
That's like, whoa, what is happening?
And the cool part about that is Arcady is somebody we've seen in the readout to Brain Boy.
Yeah.
We haven't actually seen him confront Arcady yet. So he's continuing to follow this mystery, leading him to Arcady. And along the way, finding all kinds of roadblocks to get there. It was cool. It was a cool ending.
Yeah, and issue 3 gets, way more tricky, where there's times that when you're reading it, I don't know anyone's specific reaction, but most likely they're going to be like, what is this? And not in a bad way, but it's just going to be keeping you guessing, what is it that's happening? It's a pretty cool, couple of twists that happen, in both the next issues, but specifically 3.
I like that aspect of it, though. If it's a spy story, there should be a mystery. And if you don't feel like there's a constant mystery, like you're trying to catch up with what's going on because you're trying to gather clues, I do feel like as a reader, I'm traveling along with Matt. And I think that's really important to attach me onto a character, is to feel like as he's discovering things, I'm discovering them too.
Yeah.
I'm a Batman fan. I love that Batman knows 3 million things more than I do. That's Batman. But with Brain Boy, it shouldn't feel that same way. And this is where characters get distinct, is in this case, I'm riding along with him. Because it's a spy story, we're discovering clues together. And I feel like I'm an agent here with him in that read. I love being in that role as a reader. That to me is where, comics are my escape from life stresses. Just the ability to be able to read and enjoy this and be pulled into this world and feel like I'm riding along with the mystery and I'm here, I'm a part of this piece is cool. And I like the ending, even the way it closes. It says, you have just experienced the men from G.E.S.T.A.L.T, part 2 of 4. I like you have just experienced, just because it's a different sort of way to frame and present this. There's a certain point to framing a comic in a way that matches the whole experience that you have. And little tiny pieces sometimes just add to the experience that's already there. It's a very well-produced project.
Thank you very much. It was very fun to work on. I wouldn't be surprised at all if I end up doing some more Brain Boy stuff in the future, because I like the team that I'm working on and working with. And I'm definitely doing more Dark Horse stuff in the future because I enjoy working with them. But there's... specifically with Brain Boy, there's a big connection there for me with him. So, and with Fred and with Jim, working with them on the book, it's a fun project. So I'm pretty sure I'll be doing another. I know for sure. I'm currently actually writing an 8-page short story myself that I'm gonna write, pencil, ink, and color.
Nice.
So cool. I'm doing everything except for lettering it. I'm not sure exactly. It's going to be in a Dark Horse Presents, but I'm not sure which one it'll be. It would be cool if I ended up working on their miniseries or something like that in the future. We'll see, because everything is schedule dependent. So, but yeah, I really dig it.
Well, if you have time, we got to do that when that comes out. I'd love to do something with that, because that'd be cool to talk about your experience of doing, like, you know,
everything.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of being able to, like, how that works differently than where you're kind of the writer, director, cameraman, so to speak. You're really crafting your own film.
Yeah, there's really going to be no one I can blame if it doesn't work, so it'll just be me. But, you know, if it does well, then that's all me too. So hopefully it'll be fun and people will like it. But yeah, that would be cool. I'd like to be on for that too.
I think for people who've listened to you for years on our show, you've had so many different great relationships in the creative teams that you've worked with, where you've held different collaborative roles as far as being, you know, on a part of the writing side of it in what you were doing. There's always been a desire of yours to do more of the writing side of it too. That's something that's come through in many interviews that we've had with you. So it's cool to kind of be able to see you in that role, having a chance to kind of script yourself. I can't wait to see what that looks like.
I can't wait either. I'm still early in the process, so hopefully I don't mess it up. But I have a tendency to mentally kind of trick myself into getting stuck in the plotting stage of things and not necessarily let myself actually write stuff. I keep trying to prepare the foundation for a story, and it's hard for me to actually execute it. So I'm hoping to break myself of that, and that could even lead maybe to bigger projects later on. Like if I ever do a creator-owned book, it'd be great if I could do basically everything on it, as long as I have the mental stamina to do that on a longer sort of story. But anyway, I'm taking one step at a time. I'm hoping to learn as I go. You know?
Are you finding, and I don't know if this is even a fair question to ask you right now, are you finding that you have to set aside the artist hat when you're writing, or does the artist hat help you?
I'm definitely not setting aside the artist hat, that's for sure, because I'm trying to think of what will make for singular striking images.
Cool.
Where I'm not, and not like breaking it apart into a bunch of small little panels if I don't need to, because I'm wanting bigger, more striking images, or creepier, or whatever the setting is. So that's not setting it aside. I'm not really sure if I'm past that, if I keep the hat on or not, because I'm very much a novice when it comes to doing full-fledged writing on something. So I'm not even sure what the writing hat feels like. I don't know how well it fits on my head, but the hat I know the best is the artist one. So I'm wearing that as securely as possible.
That's cool. I mean, it's an interesting process. Yeah, I would be thrilled if we had the opportunity to talk to you about that process, because I'm sure it would be I'm sure it's probably a very personal and unique experience for every creator, no matter what hat you wear. I'll put quotes around that. I know you've wanted to do stuff like this for some time, just from a lot of the things you've alluded to when you've had conversations with us. So I'm excited that that's going to be coming to fruition. That's cool.
Thank you. Me too. Yeah, it'd be cool to talk to you about it once I have it more in control, or whenever it's been published.
Where can people find out information about you? I know for listeners of the show who are longtime listeners, they obviously already know, but for new listeners, maybe this is their first episode of our show, and they're a Dark Horse fan and, you know, been reading Brain Boy, and they want to know more about you. Where can they find information about you?
The primary spot would be my website, which is freddieart.com. Freddie is spelled with an I-E. And on there I have links from my website, freddieart.com, to my Facebook, my Twitter, my YouTube, my DeviantArt. It has all that stuff on there, you know, so that's like the hub, the central hub. And I also list on the front page of my website all the different projects that I'm involved in, even if it's just covers or that sort of thing. But whatever it is, because especially in the last year or so, I've been juggling a lot more smaller projects than ever before. So I'm making it, one common place so that it's easier to find. And I post quite a bit of promotional art and work in progress artwork on my Twitter and Facebook. But again, that can be found easily through freddieart.com.
And that'll be in our show note. If you didn't write that down now, we always, anytime we have guests on or, a link or something is shouted out on the show, we put them in the show notes as well, which then goes on our website. Easy to click and bookmark for yourself to keep following. It's good stuff. Freddie, is there anything that we missed that you wanted to shout out or talk about?
As always, you do a good amount, or a fair amount of research, and definitely an introspection into the actual comic book, and a great opportunity to talk about the behind the scenes of the creating of the comic book artwork and all that stuff. So, no, I think we covered it pretty well.
Well, thank you for your time. I mean, you always give us so much time, and we really appreciate your generosity with that. It's always fun to talk with you. You've been a longtime friend of the show, and it's always fun to catch up and see what's going on with your projects, because I enjoy seeing your evolution as an artist. We've had the opportunity to first get to know you through Robin, and then just to follow all of these wonderful projects you've been doing along the way, and just seeing the way that you play with the medium has just been a pure joy. So thank you again for joining us on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah, and thanks for being cool and having good conversations. It's good to know you guys.
There they are, all alone except for that old character.
I want to remind everyone about our show voicemail line. It's 1-440-388-4434 or Dr. Norge on Skype. We love having you part of the show, so please feel free to call in anytime. Our show sponsors this episode are DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. Remember that DCBService.com is your comic book pre-order source. InStockTrades.com is where you want to pick up your Brain Boy material. If you love this episode, and Brain Boy I've become a quick fan of Brain Boy. You can pick up the first trade paperback collecting issues 0 through 3. It's $14.99 regularly, 42% off, only $8.69. You can also pick up the Brain Boy Archives, which are $49.99 regularly, 42% off, only $28.99. It's a great way to grab everything Dark Horse has done so far with Brain Boy that will get you caught up for the 2 issues that we talked about on this particular episode. I want to thank DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com for continuing to support our show. I want to remind everyone that we're available on social media. We have a RagingBullets.com website that feeds into our Twitter account, which is a Raging Bullets Twitter account. We also feeds into our Raging Bullets Facebook page. We have a wonderful Facebook group that we share with DCinfinite.com. And we talk about not only DC Comics, but all of comics and pop culture. There's a great community of people there that have grown well beyond our show. And please feel free to invite friends of yours to it. Anybody who wants to talk comics and pop culture, share your blogs, podcasts, comic content, anything that's relating to you. I'm a big fan of cross-promotion, so please feel free to use that site for that purpose. It's one of the great things about the comic community. We also I have a personal Facebook page. Please feel free to add it. I do most of my posting to Facebook from my personal Facebook account, so please feel free to add me there. We also have a Raging Bullets Google Plus page, and I have a personal Google Plus page. I do most of my posting from my Facebook page, though, so if you want to connect social media-wise, it's a great way to do it. And I just want to thank everyone for the great shout-outs that we get from the show. We do not have an advertising budget, and we're heading close to our 400th episode. And one of the things that's been really consistent is just in the support from our community of people who have even letting just a single friend know. When you do that, those recommendations just help bring people to our podcast, and we really appreciate all you do to do that. So thank you so much for helping us out there. Our next episode is going to be right before episode 400. It's going to be the first of a 2-part look at the Green Lantern books. Plus, we also talk about Grayson #1. And we've already recorded that. Jim and I have vacations coming up, and what we did is we started recording content in advance to try and keep you content coming regularly over that time. Some episodes are going to be a little closer together. Some are going to be a little farther apart to try and get content to you in between different vacations and things. So we're going to keep regular content coming to you. We got our big anniversary show, which has already been recorded. And actually, there's a slight change to that anniversary show. Episode 400 for right now is going to be, because it took us well over 4 hours to record this, they actually became 2 commentary tracks. We are going to be doing Batman and Robin and Superman 4. We're not dumping Catwoman. What we're doing is we're going to move that to a later in August recording. We're going to do that as its own separate commentary track. These and as we were having the discussions, they wound up being as long as the movies, so you can actually watch them along with the movies. Art Lyon and I, who was on the show with us, we were actually watching the movies while we were having the conversation. So we do jump around in the order of the movie, but it's kind of fun to enjoy the movie with us as you're doing it. So I encourage you to consider doing that with the episode. But it's something a little wacky and a little different from our normal show, and hopefully you guys will really enjoy this as something special for our 400th episode.
Bye!
Flying through space and time, 1,000 different lifetimes. Faded for love and loss and incredibly clear sightlines. Swinging your mace around, such a practical outlook. Helping the G.E.S.T.A.L.T and occasionally supporting your own book. Hawkman, Hawkman, eagle eyes can't see. Hawkman, your plan and what you do to me. Hawkman. The villains are closing in, be they Thenin guard or Egyptian. Working so hard to thwart you and Hawkgirl's mission. The odds are not on your side, and danger seems to stack up. Things would be so much easier if you would just call for backup. Hawkman, Hawkman, eagle eyes can't see.